Every year, millions of animals mysteriously disappear from American soil, leaving entire ecosystems transformed. But why are they leaving? What forces are driving these mass exoduses? Let's figure this out together. Throughout history, animals have moved across landscapes in search of food, shelter, and more favorable climates. This natural phenomenon, known as migration, is one of nature's most fascinating events. From the vast herds of wildebeests in Africa to the flocks of monarch butterflies spanning North America, migration allows species to survive and thrive despite changing seasons and conditions. Every year, millions of animals instinctively travel hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles, following paths that have been used for generations. But lately, something unusual is happening. While migration is a normal part of many species' lives, we're now witnessing an alarming shift. Some animals are leaving their habitats in the USA at unprecedented rates and heading to entirely new regions. What could be causing this dramatic exodus? To understand, let's explore the driving forces behind this mass movement and what it means for the future of wildlife and ecosystems. Climate change. It's one of the most pressing issues of our time and one of the most powerful forces reshaping life as we know it. But what does it mean for animals in the United States? Across this vast country, rising temperatures, shifting seasons, and extreme weather events are pushing wildlife to their limits. In response, animals are doing what they've done for millennia, adapting, adjusting, and in many cases moving. But this time, they're not simply shifting territories. They're leaving their native lands entirely, embarking on journeys that take them far beyond U.S. borders in search of survival. Take, for instance, the majestic moose. These towering icons of the northern U.S. forests are highly adapted to cold, snowy climates. But with warmer winters, their thick, insulating coats become a liability, leaving them vulnerable to overheating and disease. The surge in winter ticks, thriving in the warmer months, is also taking a toll, with these pests latching onto moose in numbers that drain their energy and even lead to death. To survive, moose are migrating northward, into Canada, seeking cooler climates and relief from parasites that can't withstand the colder temperatures. And it's not just mammals feeling the heat. In the oceans, marine species are on the move too. For example, cod and lobster populations that once flourished along the New England coast are retreating to deeper, cooler waters further north. The warming Atlantic Ocean has altered temperatures, forcing these species to search for waters within their preferred range. This is creating cascading effects. Fishermen in the United States, who once depended on these species, are now left struggling, and coastal ecosystems are seeing changes as species disappear from the food chain. Birds, too, are abandoning their U.S. territories. Take the Blackpool warbler, a small songbird known for its remarkable migration from North America to South America. Climate change has shifted the timing of insect blooms, causing disruptions in the warbler's breeding season and affecting the food supply needed to sustain them. With warmer springs coming earlier and more intense summers, these birds are not just shifting their timing, but also moving further north instead of south, sometimes failing to return to their traditional U.S. breeding grounds. But the story of animal migration due to climate change is not limited to cold-loving species. Even animals accustomed to warmer climates like the American pika, a small, rabbit-like mammal that inhabits rocky mountain slopes, are facing harsh conditions. Pikas are highly sensitive to heat and can die from overheating if exposed to high temperatures for too long. In response, they are moving higher up mountain ranges or abandoning regions in the United States altogether, where temperatures have become intolerable. Unfortunately, this can only go so far. Once they reach the mountaintop, there's nowhere left to go. And in the southern deserts, the story continues. The Sonoran pronghorn, a subspecies of the pronghorn antelope, was once abundant across the southwestern U.S., but as temperatures soar and droughts become more extreme, the desert's already harsh conditions are growing more unforgiving. Water sources are drying up, vegetation is thinning, and these animals are being forced southward in search of cooler, more forgiving environments. Climate change also affects animals indirectly by altering their food sources. As temperatures rise and precipitation patterns change, plants and insects adjust their ranges, seeking more suitable climates. For instance, certain types of vegetation that sustain grazing animals are moving to higher altitudes or further north. This forces herbivores to follow, leading to shifts in entire ecosystems. And when herbivores migrate, predators are forced to follow as well, creating a ripple effect throughout the animal kingdom. Take the grizzly bear. In recent years, these formidable creatures have begun venturing northward as deer and other prey animals retreat to cooler climates, taking the predator along with them. Even fish species in American rivers are making their own exodus. Fish like the rainbow trout, sensitive to rising water temperatures, are being forced to higher altitudes or cooler streams outside the U.S., where they can find the oxygen-rich, cooler waters they need. But this migration is not without its challenges. Fish populations are heavily affected by dams, pollution, and other human barriers that prevent them from moving freely. Climate change doesn't just affect temperature, it's reshaping entire ecosystems. Forests in California are now experiencing longer fire seasons, with intense wildfires consuming habitats that used to be stable homes for countless species. Animals like the California spotted owl, native to the region, are seeing their habitats burned down, leaving them with little choice but to relocate, often to unfamiliar territories where survival is uncertain. Similarly, in Florida, rising sea levels are swallowing coastal habitats and pushing animals inland, sometimes displacing species and sometimes driving them out entirely. Coastal birds, once abundant in Florida's marshes and shores, are being driven away by both rising seas and fierce hurricanes that are stronger and more frequent than ever before. So why are animals leaving the United States? Climate change is redrawing the boundaries of where animals can survive and thrive. Whether by land or sea, from mountains to deserts, animals across the nation are abandoning their long-standing homes. As temperatures rise, they're forced to adapt, not only in behavior, but in location. They're making their way into new territories, often across borders, in a race against time to find the resources they need to live. But as animals leave their traditional habitats, they don't just vanish quietly. Their departure disrupts entire ecosystems, causing shifts that affect countless other species, plants, and even human communities. And as climate change accelerates, so too does this mass exodus of wildlife. As these species cross borders, their journeys become symbols of resilience, adaptability, and survival in an era of unprecedented environmental upheaval. Climate change is driving animals out, but another force is pushing wildlife to flee U.S. borders: habitat loss and urbanization. Across the United States, forests, grasslands, and wetlands are shrinking rapidly, giving way to cities, roads, and farmland. This relentless expansion leaves animals with fewer places to call home, forcing them into an exodus to find safe havens beyond the borders. Imagine a forest teeming with life deer, foxes, owls, all depending on a delicate balance. Now picture that forest replaced by sprawling suburbs and highways. Bobcats, once roaming freely, now find themselves isolated in small patches, risking encounters with cars and humans. Mountain lions face similar challenges in California, where urban sprawl and highways fragment their habitats. To survive, they're increasingly moving northward, where territories are less interrupted. For smaller creatures, the struggle is just as intense. Monarch butterflies, once a common sight across U.S. meadows, now find their milkweed habitat replaced by concrete and crops. As wildflowers vanish, monarchs are pushed further south, finding sanctuary only in Mexico. Meanwhile, the wetlands, once vast and thriving, are disappearing. The snowy egret, a delicate wading bird, relies on these wetlands for survival. But with over half of U.S. wetlands gone, egrets are driven to find refuge in the shrinking marshes that still exist in Central America. Even the seas are impacted. Coastal development and pollution have degraded marine habitats. Sea otters along the Pacific coast are losing their safe havens, some relocating to quieter shores further south where food is still abundant, but dangers abound. Roads in urban areas act like barriers, making it nearly impossible for animals to migrate naturally within the U.S. highways, cut across traditional routes, separating populations and forcing many animals to abandon these disrupted regions entirely. For species like the pronghorn and even fish like the rainbow trout, restricted migration spells reduce survival. Some fish populations are moving northward, escaping the increasingly warm and polluted waters in hopes of finding cooler streams in Canadian rivers. The choices for these animals are few: adapt to urban life, retreat to smaller and smaller habitats, or leave. Some, like raccoons, manage to coexist with urban development, but others, like the red fox, are now being pushed into remote areas, even crossing into Canada in search of untouched wilderness. The relentless march of development is shrinking the world of these animals, leaving them with few places to go. The impact of habitat loss and urbanization is undeniable. As we reshape the land, we shrink the territory of countless species. This isn't just a migration, it's a crisis that could redefine our ecosystems forever. These animals' departure should serve as a wake-up call as we expand, their world contracts. And with it, the richness of our natural world fades, leaving behind a landscape forever altered. Pollution and ecosystem damage. Climate change and habitat loss are powerful forces driving animals away, but there's another threat pushing wildlife out of the United States: pollution. From contaminated waters to toxic air, pollution is affecting ecosystems at every level. As humans pollute the land, air, and water, animals face harsh conditions they can no longer endure. For many, survival means moving away from these degraded environments, abandoning long-standing homes for cleaner, safer places. Rivers and lakes are some of the hardest-hit habitats. Streams once teeming with life now carry pollutants from factories, farms, and cities. Chemicals, fertilizers, and plastic waste flow into rivers, poisoning fish and aquatic life. Species like the American eel, which once thrived in the rivers of the eastern United States, are particularly vulnerable. These eels rely on clean water to spawn and grow, but as pollution spreads, their numbers decline, forcing them to move downstream, searching for cleaner waters beyond U.S. borders. In the Midwest, the mighty Mississippi River, once a rich ecosystem, has become a pathway for pollutants. Fertilizer runoff from agriculture flows into the river, creating dead zones where oxygen levels drop too low to support most marine life. Fish, crabs, and shrimp are left with no choice but to flee these waters, retreating downstream toward the Gulf of Mexico, or even venturing further in search of less polluted areas where they can survive. For some species, this migration brings them beyond U.S. waters, altering the balance of aquatic life in the Gulf and impacting species across the marine food chain. In coastal regions, pollution is driving even large marine mammals to leave. Bottlenose dolphins, once common along the Gulf Coast, are affected by chemical spills, industrial runoff, and plastic pollution. These contaminants weaken their immune systems, making them vulnerable to disease. Seeking refuge, many dolphins migrate to less polluted waters, moving farther out into the open ocean or heading along coastlines outside U.S. boundaries. But the further they go, the more uncertain their future becomes. For land animals, pollution brings a different set of challenges. Air quality in many urban and industrial areas has degraded to levels that impact both human and animal health. Pollutants like smog and particulate matter affect respiratory systems, and animals that cannot tolerate polluted air are forced to leave. In areas like Los Angeles, which frequently experiences high smog levels, birds such as the American kestrel are abandoning their urban habitats. These birds, once common in cities, are now moving to rural areas with cleaner air, sometimes even crossing borders to find the unspoiled environments they need. Pollution's impact on food sources is another major reason animals are leaving. Insects, a primary food source for many birds and mammals, are declining due to pesticide use and habitat contamination. This means that animals relying on insects, from birds to amphibians, are struggling to find enough food. Species like the barn swallow, known for their aerial acrobatics, are leaving areas with heavy pesticide use, migrating further northward and even into Canada, where insect populations are less impacted by chemicals. But as they move, they leave behind gaps in ecosystems where they once played crucial roles in controlling insect populations. The soil itself is not immune to pollution. Heavy metals from industrial waste contaminate the ground, affecting plants and the animals that depend on them. In mining regions, contaminated soil has driven animals like the white-tailed deer to migrate away from their home ranges. These herbivores ingest toxins through plants, and in high enough doses, these pollutants can cause illness or death. With their traditional grazing lands polluted, deer are now venturing into new areas, sometimes even crossing into neighboring countries in search of safer feeding grounds. For some animals, migration isn't enough to escape pollution. Amphibians like frogs and salamanders are particularly vulnerable, as they absorb pollutants directly through their skin. In regions with high pesticide use or industrial contamination, amphibian populations are dwindling. Many species are abandoning once thriving wetlands, forced to find cleaner habitats or face extinction. Their departure disrupts food chains and affects predators that rely on them, causing ripple effects across entire ecosystems. Pollution doesn't only drive animals out, it reshapes entire ecosystems. As species leave, others try to move in, but they may not be suited to the altered environment. This leads to imbalanced ecosystems, where invasive species can take over, further displacing native wildlife. Pollution's toll is heavy, and while some animals manage to adapt, many must migrate, searching for cleaner, healthier lands. The mass movement of animals driven out by pollution is a stark reminder of the consequences of human activity. Rivers, forests, coasts, and prairies are losing species they've harbored for centuries. With each contaminated site, we're losing more than wildlife. We're losing pieces of the ecosystems that support all life. As these animals move on, they carry a message. The fight for survival is no longer just theirs, it's ours too. Pollution is driving animals to search for safer lands, but there's another critical force pushing them away: changes in food availability. Food, the one resource every living being depends on, is now becoming scarce or unreliable in many regions across the United States. From the oceans to the forests, animals are facing food shortages, forcing many to migrate to new regions in search of sustenance. Without enough to eat, they're left with no choice but to abandon the habitats they've known for generations. In the ocean, warming waters have disrupted the entire food chain. Fish like the Pacific salmon, which rely on cold, nutrient-rich waters, are struggling as their food sources diminish. Rising temperatures are reducing plankton populations, the foundation of marine diets. As plankton numbers fall, so do the fish that depend on them. Starving salmon are leaving traditional waters, migrating further north along the Pacific coast and even into Canadian waters, where cooler temperatures still support the plankton blooms they need to survive. But this migration isn't without costs. Salmon face new predators, tougher competition, and the added energy demands of longer migrations. Further down the food chain, small fish that are vital to seabirds are also moving. Species like sardines and anchovies have shifted their ranges to escape warmer, less nutrient-rich waters near the U.S. coast. Seabirds like puffins, once commonly seen along America's coastlines, are following these fish farther north. But with each mile they face increased risk. Seabirds must expend more energy on longer flights to catch food, and some even fail to reach their breeding grounds, leading to declining populations and an eerie silence where once thriving colonies existed. On land, the story is similar. In the forests, changes in weather patterns are impacting the growth of plants and the availability of seeds, nuts, and berries. The American black bear, once abundant in the eastern United States, relies heavily on acorns and berries to build up fat stores for winter. But as erratic weather disrupts flowering and fruiting seasons, these critical food sources are becoming unpredictable. In search of more reliable supplies, some bears are venturing northward or into higher altitudes. Others move west, following food sources into Canada, where the environment has remained more stable. And it's not just mammals. Insects, a primary food source for birds, reptiles, and small mammals, are declining due to shifts in seasonal patterns and pesticide use. The insect population drop has hit insectivorous birds like the common nighthawk particularly hard. Nighthawks once thrived in both urban and rural U.S. settings, but with insects in decline, these birds are migrating further than before, pushing into Canada and beyond in search of the abundance they once had at home. As they go, they leave behind disrupted ecosystems that relied on their role as natural insect controllers. Even apex predators like wolves are affected by food scarcity. In the northern United States, wolves rely on prey animals like deer and elk to survive. But as deer populations migrate northward in response to changing vegetation and temperatures, wolves are forced to follow. This northward shift brings them into new territories, sometimes into conflict with Canadian wildlife and local conservation efforts. Wolves must not only adapt to new prey but also compete with resident predators, creating a tense struggle for survival. Changes in food availability aren't just seasonal, they're becoming year-round challenges. With less food available, animals are forced into new territories, creating conflicts with native species and destabilizing ecosystems. In places like Alaska, caribou herds that once fed on lichen-rich tundra are moving northward as the tundra thaws and lichen growth becomes sparse. Crossing international borders, they impact the delicate balance of northern ecosystems and disrupt local communities that rely on them. For some animals, the shift in food supply is even more direct. Predators that rely on migratory prey face cascading effects when those species relocate. Birds of prey like the peregrine falcon are struggling as shorebirds and smaller migratory birds shift northward to find food. Peregrines, forced to travel greater distances to hunt, are being pushed into unfamiliar territories, impacting breeding success and survival rates. For many of these predators, the relentless pursuit of food becomes a dangerous and exhaustive journey. From fish to birds, predators to prey, every level of the food chain is impacted by these changes. As food becomes more scarce in the United States, animals are migrating out, testing new territories in their fight for survival. These shifts in food availability highlight the interconnected nature of our ecosystems. When one species leaves, it creates a void that affects others, sparking a chain reaction that echoes through the natural world. For the animals leaving their U.S. habitats due to food scarcity, the journey is perilous, and the stakes are high. They must adapt quickly to new environments, compete with resident species, and navigate unfamiliar terrains. But for many, there is no alternative. In the face of vanishing food sources, these migrations are their last chance at survival, a desperate bid to find a new home before it's too late. As animals struggle to find food and safer habitats, human influence becomes yet another force shaping their fate. While pollution, urbanization, and climate change have pushed animals to migrate, some human efforts to help wildlife are, ironically, contributing to their relocation. Conservation efforts across the United States seek to protect and even restore certain species, but these well-meaning interventions can also prompt migrations, shifting animals beyond their traditional ranges and into new territories. One striking example is the reintroduction of gray wolves to Yellowstone National Park. While the effort successfully restored balance to the park's ecosystem, it has also led wolves to expand beyond park borders. As populations grow, wolves are venturing out of the United States, crossing into Canada in search of new hunting grounds. This movement stirs controversy as they encounter ranching lands and communities unaccustomed to coexisting with such apex predators. Conservation success for one species can often lead to displacement or competition with others, sending shockwaves through entire ecosystems. Human-led conservation sometimes includes relocating endangered species to safer habitats, but these new environments can lie across borders. The American red wolf, one of the world's most endangered canids, was reintroduced to select areas in the southeastern United States. But as human pressures persist, even these protected zones are not always enough. Some red wolves have wandered beyond conservation sites, seeking undisturbed territories that may take them out of the country altogether, driven by the need for space and isolation. On a broader scale, wildlife corridors are being developed to connect fragmented habitats, enabling species to move more freely. But this increased mobility sometimes encourages animals to migrate out of the United States, venturing across borders to areas with fewer human pressures. These migrations can disrupt local ecosystems as new species arrive and alter the dynamics of native wildlife populations. Across the United States, animals are being driven to new territories. Climate change, habitat loss, pollution, food scarcity, and even human-led conservation efforts all shape this mass migration. Each factor disrupts ecosystems, pushing wildlife beyond borders in a search for survival. As we reshape their habitats, animals must adapt, move, or disappear. Their migration is a powerful signal of a world in flux, reminding us that protecting these species means addressing the forces driving them away before it's too late. That's about it. How do you think we should deal with such animal migration? Let me know in the comments, and for more useful information, watch other videos.